The hospital lights flickered softly above her, as if uncertain whether to remain on. In that sterile white room, the hum of machines and the faint rhythm of a heart monitor were the only sounds that dared to disturb the silence. Maria lay motionless, her frail hands folded over a thin blanket, her rosary wound loosely between her fingers. To the doctors, she was another case, a medical mystery with charts full of data, scans, and failed treatments. To her family, she was everything. The diagnosis had come months earlier, sharp and cold, like the edge of a scalpel. "Stage 4, the doctor said, his tone attempting professionalism, but barely concealing sorrow. "Oh, we'll do what we can." The words fell into the silence like stones sinking into deep water. There was no cure, only the countdown of days. At first, Maria had fought fiercely. Chemotherapy, radiation, diet changes, experimental medications. But with every round, her strength waned and her spirit began to dim. By the third hospital stay, she no longer prayed for healing, only for peace. She looked at the crucifix above her bed and whispered through cracked lips, "Jesus, if you will, take me soon." But her mother, Rosa, would not surrender to despair. Every evening she arrived with a small candle and her worn blue rosary, the one passed down through generations of women who had endured famine, war, and heartbreak. "We will pray, Maria," she said with a voice that trembled yet refused to break. "We will ask Our Lady to intercede." At first, Maria resisted. "Mama," she said weakly, "it's too late. I've made my peace." But Rosa shook her head. "It is never too late for grace." That night, she began the first rosary of what would become a novena, 9 days of prayer asking for the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Word spread among the parish. Friends, neighbors, even strangers began to pray with them from afar. Messages poured in. "We are praying the novena for Maria." On the second night, Maria's father placed a small statue of Our Lady of Lourdes on her bedside table. The faint hospital light cast a soft halo around it, and Maria, half asleep, thought she saw the statue smile. By the fourth day, something began to change, not in the charts or medical reports, but in the air itself. Nurses whispered that the room felt different. One said she could sense peace whenever she entered, as though the walls themselves had begun to pray. Maria, too, felt something stirring deep within, the faint ember of hope she thought had been extinguished. Between doses of pain medication, she began to whisper the Hail Mary along with her mother. Her voice was thin, like the flicker of a candle about to go out, but it was there. "Hail Mary, full of grace." And on the 7th night, something extraordinary happened. The nurses entered to check her vitals and found Maria awake, alert and smiling. The color had returned to her cheeks, and she asked for food, real food, for the first time in weeks. The doctor, startled, reviewed her chart twice, then 3 times. The scans showed no new progression. The pain that had tormented her for months had simply stopped. He called it temporary remission. Rosa called it a mother's prayer heard. Maria, however, knew something deeper was unfolding. She could feel it in her bones, in her very soul, that something sacred had touched her. That night, she asked her mother to help her sit up and pray the full rosary herself. As the beads slipped through her trembling fingers, the hospital room filled with a quiet that was not emptiness, but presence. It was as though the Blessed Mother herself stood beside the bed, listening, smiling, weeping softly in love. And then came the 9th day, the final prayer of the novena. By then, the doctors were speechless. Her vitals were perfect. The tumors had shrunk beyond what the scans could reasonably explain. The attending physician murmured under his breath, "There's no medical reason for this." But Maria, clutching her rosary, whispered in reply, "It doesn't need a reason. It's grace." That night, as she drifted into peaceful sleep, her last words to her mother were, "Mama, tell everyone. Tell them Our Lady still listens." The story of Maria's healing would soon spread far beyond her small town, an echo of hope for the weary, a testimony for the doubtful, and a living reminder that miracles are not relics of the past. They still happen, especially when prayed through the gentle hands of Mary, for those who suffer, who lie awake in the night haunted by diagnoses, despair, and the silence of unanswered prayers. Maria's story begins as a whisper of possibility, that the Rosary, when prayed with faith and love, can open doors that even doctors cannot explain. Her healing was more than physical. It was a conversion of the heart, a journey from fear to faith, from resignation to radiant trust, from the shadow of death into the light of divine mercy. And as we begin this episode, we'll walk beside Maria on that path from hospital bed to healing grace, where heaven itself seemed to bend low to listen to a mother's prayer. The morning of the second day of the novena broke quietly. Through the half-open hospital blinds, soft sunlight poured into the room like liquid gold. The light rested upon the little statue of Our Lady of Lourdes that sat near Maria's bedside, casting a gentle glow upon her serene face. Rosa noticed it first and whispered, "Look, my child." Even the light kneels before her. Maria smiled faintly. Her body was still weak, but her heart was beginning to awaken. As the morning nurse adjusted her IV, she whispered to herself the opening words of the novena. "O most beautiful flower of Mount Carmel, fruitful vine, splendor of heaven." The words, though ancient, felt alive, like a promise whispered directly from heaven. That day, Rosa invited friends and fellow parishioners to join in prayer at the small chapel in their hometown church. They brought candles, flowers, and pictures of loved ones who were ill. The parish bell rang 9 times to mark the beginning of the communal novena, and even the priest, Father Miguel, stood before the statue of the Virgin, tears in his eyes as he lifted the rosary. Each bead carried the weight of countless intentions: children who had drifted from faith, parents who were sick, and souls burdened by grief. Yet amidst all those petitions, Maria's name was on every heart. The rosary became a river of prayer flowing from the chapel into the hospital, a current of intercession that seemed to bridge heaven and earth. Inside her hospital room, Maria closed her eyes and listened to her mother's voice reciting the familiar mysteries. The repetition, Hail Mary after Hail Mary, was not dull to her. It was like breathing, each prayer a heartbeat, each word a thread, weaving her frailty into something eternal. On the third day, as Rosa prayed aloud, something happened that both would remember for the rest of their lives. Maria had drifted into a light sleep when she suddenly felt a presence, gentle yet unmistakable. It was not the presence of a nurse, nor the doctor making rounds. It was different. She felt warmth surround her, the air thick with the scent of roses, though no flowers were in the room. When she opened her eyes, she saw a soft light, bluish-white, pure and calm, hovering near the statue of Our Lady. She blinked, certain it was the medication playing tricks on her, but the light remained, and within it she felt, not heard, a voice. "Do not be afraid. My son hears you." Tears filled her eyes. Her heart, once heavy with resignation, was suddenly bursting with peace. She reached for her mother's hand and whispered, "Mama." "She's here." Rosa froze, unsure if her daughter was delirious. But then she too felt it, the faintest touch of warmth on her shoulder, as though someone invisible stood beside her, praying with them. For a long while neither spoke. They simply continued their rosary, and the presence lingered until the last Amen. From that day onward, Maria no longer prayed merely for healing. She prayed for surrender. She prayed to be united with God's will, whatever that might mean. "If it is your will that I am healed, I praise you," she whispered. "If it is your will that I suffer, I praise you still." It was the novena of surrender, the true heart of every miracle. By the 5th day, visitors came not to comfort Maria, but to draw strength from her. Her smile radiated peace that no pain could erase. Her once frail voice now recited the mysteries with power. Nurses began timing their shifts to coincide with her prayer hours, confessing quietly that her room had become the calmest place in the ward. Even the hospital chaplain, who had seen decades of suffering, said one evening, "There's something holy about this room. I can feel it." As the novena continued, Maria's transformation deepened. The heaviness in her chest lessened. The nights grew peaceful. She began to dream of a vast garden where she walked barefoot through flowers that never faded. In the center of the garden stood a lady clothed in light, smiling with maternal tenderness. In the dream, the lady placed a rosary in her hands and said, "This is the chain that binds you to heaven. Hold it and never let go." When she awoke, she found the rosary her mother had given her glowing faintly under the hospital light. That evening, Rosa recounted what Father Miguel had shared from the parish. A woman who had been barren for years had discovered she was pregnant during the novena. An elderly man in hospice had passed peacefully after decades of fear. Miracles, large and small, were unfolding everywhere the rosary was prayed. Maria wept, not for herself, but for the goodness of God that poured out through such a simple act of prayer. "All these years," she said softly, "I thought miracles belonged to saints and visionaries, but maybe they belong to anyone who loves enough to trust." On the 7th day, the attending physician returned with new scans, expecting little change. But what he found left him speechless. The masses that had riddled her body were receding rapidly, as though melting away. Her vitals were strong. Her blood tests, once alarming, were near normal. He stared at the results, muttering, "I don't understand this." Rosa smiled through tears and said quietly, "You don't need to, doctor. Just believe." Maria's story was no longer just about her illness. It was becoming a witness to a deeper truth. That heaven listens, even in hospital rooms. That prayer, whispered through pain, can summon the very mercy of God. And that Mary, our mother, still walks the earth unseen, carrying the petitions of her children to her Son. By the 8th day, hope had replaced fear. The prayers no longer felt desperate. They were songs of gratitude. And as the final day approached, Maria sensed something profound stirring within her soul. It was not just her body that was being healed. It was her heart, her faith, her understanding of love itself. She turned to her mother that night and said, "Mama, when this is over, I want to tell everyone what Our Lady has done. People need to know she still listens. They need to know she still loves." Rosa kissed her forehead. "Then, my child," she whispered, "you shall tell the world." The 9th day of the novena dawned like no other. Outside the hospital, the sky was washed with the pale gold of early morning, the kind of light that seems to breathe rather than shine. Inside room 312, silence rested gently, broken only by the rhythmic pulse of the heart monitor. Steady, calm, alive. Rosa stood by the window, rosary entwined between her fingers, eyes closed in prayer. She had prayed the same words for 9 days, and yet that morning they felt different. They no longer rose from fear, but from thanksgiving. She could feel it. Something had changed. The air itself seemed lighter, filled with expectancy, as though heaven was about to speak. Maria opened her eyes slowly. For the first time in weeks, there was no pain, no heaviness in her chest. She inhaled deeply, her lungs expanding with ease. Her hands, once trembling, now lay still and strong upon the sheets. "Mama," she said softly, "I don't feel sick anymore." Rosa turned, tears welling instantly. She crossed the room and grasped her daughter's hands, searching her face for signs of fatigue or fever, but found only radiance. Maria's eyes, once shadowed by illness, shone clear and bright like the eyes of someone who had glimpsed eternity and returned changed. "Let's finish it," Maria said, lifting her rosary. "The last day," Rosa nodded, her hands trembling as she kissed the crucifix. Together they began, "I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth." As the decades unfolded, something sacred filled the room. Not visible, not measurable, but profoundly felt. Nurses passing by slowed their steps, drawn by an unseen peace. One whispered to another, "Do you feel that?" Another said, "It's like walking into a chapel." Midway through the glorious mysteries, Maria suddenly paused. She closed her eyes and whispered, "She's here again." Rosa froze. Her heart pounded. Then she too sensed it. The same soft fragrance of roses, stronger than before, flooding the air as if every blossom of Lourdes and Fatima had opened at once. A warmth enveloped them, gentle and radiant. In that light, Maria saw her. The Blessed Mother stood at the foot of the bed, clothed in luminous white with a mantle that shimmered like morning dew on blue silk. Her hands were folded in prayer, and from between her fingers, a rosary glowed. The same radiant gold as the one Maria now held. Mary's eyes, full of compassion, turned toward her and seemed to gaze straight into her soul. There were no words spoken aloud, yet Maria heard her as clearly as if heaven itself were whispering, "My child, your suffering has been seen. Your tears have not fallen unnoticed. My son has heard your prayers. Go and tell of his mercy." Then, just as gently as she had appeared, the vision faded, leaving behind a peace so profound it seemed to pulse in every breath. Maria wept silently, overwhelmed by love, by awe, by the certainty that what had just happened was no dream. "Mama," she said through tears, "she told me to tell everyone that her son heard us." Rosa embraced her daughter, sobbing with joy. For years she had believed, but now she knew. Faith had become sight. Minutes later, the doctor entered, Dr. Alan Carr, a man known more for his skepticism than his faith. He carried the results of the latest scan, his expression unreadable. "Maria," he began, flipping through the papers, "I need to verify this with another lab, but I can't explain what I'm seeing." Rosa stepped closer, her heart pounding. "The growths, they're gone," he said finally. "Completely gone. Your blood work is normal. Your scans are clear. It's as if they were never there." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I've seen remission before, but never this. Medically, this shouldn't be possible." Maria smiled through tears. "Maybe not for medicine, doctor, but for God, all things are possible." The doctor sighed and shook his head slightly, but his tone softened. "Whatever happened, you've been given a gift. Make it count." After he left, Maria reached for her rosary again. Her hands trembled, not from weakness now, but from reverence. "Mama," she whispered, "he really did it." Through her hands, through her prayers. That evening, word spread through the ward. The nurses who had witnessed Maria's decline now came to see her recovery with their own eyes. One whispered, "She's walking again." Another added, "I saw her chart. It's a miracle." By nightfall, room 312 had become a place of pilgrimage. Staff paused before entering, some making the sign of the cross, others simply standing in silence, touched by something they could not name. Even the most hardened hearts admitted that something divine had happened there. When Father Miguel visited the next morning, Maria greeted him with a radiant smile. "Father," she said, "Our Lady came." The priest's eyes glistened. "Tell me everything," he whispered. She told him every detail, every word, every light-filled moment. When she finished, Father Miguel knelt beside her bed and began to pray the Magnificat. "My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior." And as his voice filled the room, Maria joined him, their voices blending into a song of thanksgiving that seemed to rise beyond the hospital walls and into the heavens. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, not a storm, but a gentle cleansing drizzle that bathed the streets in silver light. Rosa stood at the window, watching it fall, her heart overflowing. "She said she would tell the world," she murmured, "and she will." In the days that followed, Maria's healing was confirmed again and again. Every test, every image, every report told the same story: complete restoration. Doctors sent her case to research boards, but no one could explain it. They used words like spontaneous remission or unexplained phenomenon, but Maria simply smiled and said it was a novena. Yet the true miracle was not only in her body, it was in her soul, in the faith rekindled, the hearts touched, the hope restored in every person who heard her story. Because sometimes heaven does not need to speak in thunder or vision. Sometimes it whispers through a mother's tears, a child's prayer, and a rosary held in trembling hands. In the weeks that followed her miraculous healing, Maria's life became a living testimony of grace. The hospital that had once been her place of sorrow now became her mission ground. Nurses who had silently doubted the power of prayer began bringing their own rosaries to work. Doctors who had long relied only on science started pausing, even if just for a moment, before saying the words, "There's nothing more we can do." One morning, Maria stood before the very same window where she once stared in despair. Now she looked out upon the rising sun, its light painting the sterile walls gold. She clutched her rosary, worn from use, its beads smooth under her fingertips. The same rosary that had witnessed her tears, her surrender and her healing. "Lord," she prayed softly, "let me use this miracle not to glorify myself, but you. Let it remind others that even in our darkest hour, heaven is nearer than we think." Her mother, Rosa, watched quietly from the doorway, her heart swelling with gratitude. She thought back to those endless nights, the fear, the exhaustion, the whispered prayers between sobs, and she realized that the miracle had not begun with Maria's healing. It had begun the moment they refused to stop believing. Soon after Maria's discharge, Father Miguel invited her to share her story at the parish where the novena had been prayed. It was a simple Sunday service, but word spread quickly. By the time she arrived, the church was overflowing. People lined the aisles, stood along the walls, even gathered outside the open doors just to listen. Maria stepped to the pulpit, her small frame barely visible above it. Her voice trembled at first, but when she began to speak about what the Lord had done, a sacred stillness fell over the crowd. She told them about the 9th day, about the light, the fragrance of roses, the lady clothed in white who spoke without words, yet filled her with peace. She told them of the doctor's astonishment, of the scans that had changed overnight, of the presence of Mary that had remained in her heart ever since. But what moved people most was not her story's wonder, it was her humility. "I am no saint," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm no visionary. I'm just a sinner who cried out to God and was heard. The rosary didn't change heaven, it changed me. It taught me to love through the pain, to trust when I couldn't see, and to surrender when I wanted to fight." People wept openly. Some fell to their knees. Others clutched their rosaries tighter, realizing that this simple string of beads, so often overlooked, was in truth a lifeline between the human and the divine. After Mass, a young man approached Maria. His hands shook as he spoke. "I haven't prayed in years," he admitted. "My wife is sick. They say it's terminal, but after hearing you, I want to try again. I want to believe that God still listens." Maria took his hand and pressed her rosary into it. "Start tonight," she said. 1 decade. That's all heaven can work with 1 decade. That evening, the parish began organizing nightly rosary gatherings. Word spread beyond the village, to nearby towns and then across the country. Newspapers picked up the story, unexplained healing after Rosary Novena. But Maria refused interviews that sought to sensationalize it. She told one reporter gently, "It wasn't about the miracle in my body. It was about the miracle in my soul." The impact rippled outward. Hospitals began welcoming volunteer prayer groups again. Chapels once empty at night now glowed with candlelight and whispered Hail Marys. Families torn by bitterness reconciled as they prayed together for the first time in years. Even skeptics, hardened by loss or intellect, found themselves strangely moved by the sincerity of Maria's witness. At the parish, Rosa continued her quiet service, cleaning pews and setting flowers before the statue of Our Lady. One afternoon, she found a note tucked beside the vase. It read, "Because of your daughter's story, I prayed my first rosary in 20 years. My cancer is gone. The doctors can't explain it either." Rosa pressed the note to her heart and wept. "Thank you, Blessed Mother," she whispered. "Thank you for hearing her cry and for teaching the world to pray again." Months later, Maria and her mother were invited to a Marian conference. She hesitated at first. "Who am I?" she asked Father Miguel, "to speak before so many?" He smiled. "You are the proof that Mary still walks with her children. That's enough." The day of the conference arrived. The hall was filled with thousands, priests, doctors, mothers, youth groups, even journalists. On stage behind Maria was a single image, Our Lady of the Rosary, her mantle open, her eyes tender, her hands outstretched. As Maria spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd was utterly still. Her words weren't rehearsed or dramatic, they were simply true. She spoke of despair and surrender, of pain turned into prayer, and of the unexplainable peace that came when she gave everything to God through the Rosary. She concluded with a voice trembling in love. Miracles are not interruptions of the natural order. They are reminders of the supernatural love that sustains it. I was healed because Our Lady led me to trust her Son again. And that same mercy is waiting for every soul who turns to Him. When she finished, the audience rose in silence, not for applause, but in reverence. Many lifted their rosaries high, a sea of beads glinting under the light, a visible act of faith renewed. Maria stepped down from the stage, tears streaming down her cheeks. As she walked through the crowd, she felt hands reach out, not to worship her, but to ask for prayer. Mothers for their children, husbands for their wives, priests for their parishes, and in that moment, she understood what the Blessed Mother had meant on the 9th day. Tell of His mercy. The miracle had multiplied. The healing that began in a hospital room now flowed into hearts across the world. Every rosary that touched trembling hands, every novena whispered in desperation, every Hail Mary uttered in faith, they all carried a spark of that same divine love that had restored Maria's life. Years passed, and the story of Maria's healing became a quiet flame that refused to go out. It spread not through noise or spectacle, but through hearts that whispered it in prayer circles, hospitals, and family living rooms. Her name was mentioned in small chapels and large cathedrals alike, not as a celebrity of miracles, but as a witness of mercy. Maria had returned to a simple life. She still lived in the same modest home with her mother, Rosa, who grew older, but never lost her gentle devotion. Each morning before sunrise, they prayed the Rosary together, the same way they had done in that hospital room years before. But now, their prayers were filled with thanksgiving rather than supplication. The walls of their home bore witness to that gratitude. A framed image of Our Lady of Lourdes above the fireplace, a rosary hanging from every doorknob, and candles that burned low through the night. Symbols of faith that refused to flicker out. Maria often said that her healing was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of her mission. She began visiting hospitals, sitting quietly beside patients who had lost hope. She did not come with eloquence or grand words. She simply sat, held their hands, and began to pray the Rosary aloud. Many times those who could not speak found peace in the rhythm of the prayers. Some who had abandoned faith altogether began to whisper along after the second or third decade. The beads became bridges, tiny lifelines linking fear to faith, despair to divine love. One afternoon, as Maria prayed with a young mother named Elisa, a woman battling the same illness that had once afflicted her, tears began to fall freely between them. Elisa whispered, "I don't know if I'll be healed like you were." Maria smiled gently, squeezing her hand. "The miracle isn't always in the healing," she said. "Sometimes it's in the peace that comes when you trust Him, even when the pain remains. That peace is a miracle." Elisa nodded, her tears softening into a calm smile. That night, she slept peacefully for the first time in months. It was encounters like these that became the true fruit of Maria's novena. Her story no longer belonged to her. It belonged to everyone who had ever cried out to God in the dark. Eventually, a small movement grew around her example. They called it the Living Rosary of Mercy. People from all walks of life joined: soldiers, nurses, students, prisoners, mothers, atheists turned believers, each one praying daily for those who were sick, forgotten or far from God. They didn't meet for grand events. They met in kitchens, in hospital corridors, in quiet corners of life. Father Miguel, now older and slower in his step, once told her during confession, "Your suffering became a seed, Maria, and now look, it has grown into a garden of faith." She smiled softly. "It wasn't me, Father. It was Our Lady. I just held her hand. On the 10th anniversary of her healing, the bishop invited Maria and Rosa to a special Mass of Thanksgiving. The cathedral was filled to the doors, its marble floors gleaming under the light of hundreds of candles. Choir voices rose like incense, carrying the familiar hymn, Ave Maria, Gratia Plena. When Maria was called forward, she stood humbly, holding the same rosary that had changed her life. Its beads were worn smooth, its crucifix dulled with years of touch. Before the entire congregation, she raised it slightly and said, This little chain of beads brought heaven into a hospital room. It taught me that the rosary is not just words. It is love in motion, mercy in rhythm, faith made visible. Through it, Our Lady does not come to take away our crosses, but to help us carry them until they bloom into resurrection. Silence filled the cathedral. Even the air seemed still, reverent. After the Mass, a young seminarian approached her. "Do you think miracles like yours still happen today?" he asked shyly. Maria smiled, her eyes glistening. "Yes, my son. Every time someone picks up the rosary with love, heaven bends close to earth again. Every conversion, every reconciliation, every moment of forgiveness, these are miracles too. Mine just happened to be visible." In the years that followed, Maria and Rosa continued their humble apostolate of prayer. But time, as always, moved forward. Rosa's hair turned white as linen, her hands trembled more each year. Eventually, the day came when she could no longer rise from her bed. Maria sat beside her, just as Rosa had done so many years before in that hospital room. Together, they prayed the rosary one last time. Between each decade, Rosa would whisper, "Thank you, my child. Thank you for believing with me." When they finished the final Hail Mary, Rosa looked heavenward and smiled. "She's here," she whispered softly. "The same light. She's here for me." And then, with the peace of a saint, Rosa breathed her last. Maria wept, but not as one without hope. She knew where her mother was, with the lady who had carried them both through darkness into light. She placed the rosary into Rosa's folded hands and whispered, "Tell her I'll keep praying until we meet again." Years later, when Maria herself grew old, her story continued to be told by those who had heard her speak or had prayed beside her. Pilgrims began visiting her modest home, seeking not relics, but inspiration. They found in her not a woman of grandeur, but one of gentleness, a living reflection of Mary's humility. And when Maria's own final hour came, she was found with her rosary still in her hands, her face serene, her last words barely audible, "Hail Mary, full of grace." The church bells tolled softly that evening, and somewhere in the distance, a group of children knelt together, beginning their first rosary. The miracle lived on, not in headlines or hospital records, but in every whispered decade, every candle lit in hope, every sinner who dared to pray again, because the true legacy of Maria's healing was not her recovery. It was the renewal of faith it inspired, a faith that said, when the doctors cannot explain, when the world cannot understand, when hope seems gone, the rosary still whispers, "Nothing is impossible with God." And so it continues, from hospital rooms to homes, from one heart to another. The eternal echo of that novena, carried on the beads that bind heaven to earth, mother to child, and soul to God.